When leaders fail, there's a massive effect on the other side of that.
Obviously, you're not going to get up on Sunday morning and throw everything out.
You can't just muscle through it. You have to have something more.
Because at the end of the day, the building's going to turn to dust.
I think people are hungry for something that's real, that's authentic.
That we are able to get the message of Jesus Christ. We are able to tell people the truth and help them get to eternity. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Will Podcast, where our goal here is to discuss wisdom, inspiration, leadership, and legacy. And I am super honored to have Pastor Owen O'Sullivan by the way of the Springs Church in Orange Park, Florida, by way of Cork, Ireland, by way of birthplace New York City, if I'm correct.
Yeah, strange route to get here, but from New York, born in New York City. Both my parents were Irish. And they moved there for work purposes. Me and my brother were born there. They lived there about 3 years and then ended up in Cork, Ireland, and now here in Jacksonville.
Awesome. So how often have you been back to New York?
To New York? Yeah. Believe it or not, only once.
One time.
And it was on our honeymoon. I took my wife on our honeymoon to New York City when we were still in Ireland. We went to New York after a cruise. We went up to New York, and I traced back to the apartment that my parents lived in, where I first lived.
Awesome. That's cool. So I wanted to bring you in. Obviously, you are my pastor, so I am biased to you. But with that being said, like, you have a really hard job. You know, if you look around the world today, the state of the church in North America seems like it's just horrible. It just seems, attendance is down. Kind of really the heart to seek after a true relationship with Jesus Christ seems to be dwindling. But what I see that's happening in our church, the Springs Church in Orange Park, is absolutely opposite of what the culture today would show would show us. So I did a little research prior to sitting down to talk to you, and I think there is a conception that church decline is a real thing, but what the statistics show is there's a decline from denominations, but there is an increase in participation in the non-denominational churches. Do you have any wisdom to speak to that? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've always believed that the gospel has always been the answer across historical contexts. And so I think with the move from the more traditional denominational to the non-denominational, a lot of it has been a move away from strategy and looking for this camp or that camp. And it's been a moving back to the gospel. And I think what we're experiencing right now is that people are more hungrier than ever for truth. Because it is hard to lead, and it is hard not just in pastoring. I think it's hard to lead across the board, where in a world where opinion is so highly elevated, opinion is valued at a higher level than sometimes truth is. And so trying to discern what truth is, I think people are hungry for something that's real, that's authentic. And so if we can move away from just the ideas that we have and move back to the roots, which of course we believe as Christians is in God's word and is the truth, that there is still bread, there's still manna, there's still something that is the answer that is in the gospel. And I think what we're experiencing is people just want that.
Right.
So that's what I'm an optimist. I mean, I hear all of the statistics and I hear all of the things that are happening, but I think that, when darkness abounds, the Bible says his grace abounds more so. And so, yeah, we may be living in a time frame where we seeing and experiencing and hearing a lot of different things, but I think on a grassroots level, there's a rising in people having faith and believing and trusting in God.
Amen. I like it. So you're born, lived 3 years in New York, raised in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And were you understanding a little bit about the Irish culture? It's predominantly Catholic?
Very much so.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Ireland, both my parents Irish. my mom comes from a part of Ireland where the mother tongue is Gaeilge, is what we call it, but it's the Irish language. And so even in elementary school, which we call primary school, went to an all Irish speaking school, so that was our main language we spoke. And then, right, because of a lot of the troubles that took place between going back to the conflicts that were there even before I was born, but with the conflicts that happened in Ireland, it tended to be that Catholicism, if you're Irish, you naturally grafted towards Catholicism. And if you were maybe from the British side, or you were leaned more towards Protestantism. So by default, I would say both my parents came from strong Catholic backgrounds.
Okay. So how are you not a priest?
Good question. Good question. I think in school when I was growing up, they did like this thing in like where they predicted where every person in their in school what they would be when they're in the future. And I think I was predicted that I would be a priest one day when I when I got out of high school and stuff. And here I am, I'm a pastor. How am I not a priest? Well, right around a critical age, around 12 or 13, I was introduced to what we would call here evangelical or born again Christians. And I went along to a church that was so different, so unique. It was different than anything I'd experienced. It was more than methodology. It was more than tradition. It was a genuine experience. People were genuinely passionate about what they believed in. And it caught me at a very critical moment where life could have taken me a few different angles, a few different ways. But I seen the sincerity of people's belief. It led me on a journey to read scripture, to hear people's stories and testimonies. And I remember in my teen years saying, you know, if God, you are real, if you are all that is being said of you, then, you know, I want all of you. I give you my life. I surrender my life to you. And I had that transformative born again experience, which shaped the trajectory of my future from that point forward. So it was in Ireland. Ireland was in a very unique time in its history too, where just to bridge off of that, the Catholic Church was going under a lot of challenges itself. There was a lot of different headlines that were coming out of, you know, about the Catholic Church at the time, you know, and it had been such a foundation to Irish society for hundreds of years, but now it was coming under scrutiny. And at the same time, the economy within Ireland, they had recently joined the European Union, and so there was this inflow of economic gain. They called it the Celtic Tiger. And so you had this affluence that was coming upon the Irish population. And then within a very short amount of time, both some of the main foundational structures of the Catholic Church came under scrutiny. And then there was a global recession that came in. And so two of the main tenets that held Irish society together evaporated, or at least there was question marks over it. And so what was left was a whole population that I think were really searching for what is truth. Now in Ireland, I would not call it predominantly Catholic. I would call it more secular. There's more of a secular thought process that is there. But at the same time, as secularism has increased, the evangelical Christian church has had an opportunity to fill that vacuum. And so there's been a great rise within the church in that area as well.
That's amazing. So how long have you been here in the United States?
It'll be 10 years in March.
10 years in March. So that was 2013, 2014?
2014, March 2014.
So why leave home to come to this little patch of grass in Florida? Was it the weather?
It's crazy. I used to have this joke with God growing up. I wanted to marry a girl that was blonde. I wanted to live in Florida, and I wanted to be a pastor. That's just like I used to joke with God about these things in my teenage years. And when myself and Sarah met, we were both youth leaders in the church. Sarah comes from a family of 10, so like a good strong Catholic background family. She's got 10 siblings, and we've always kind of just thought our roots were going to be in Ireland, and we were going to be there. We're going to serve the local church. We're going to have our jobs there, and this is where we're going to grow up. And we were finishing a big Christian youth camp, and I was driving down the road, and I had just had this this prompting that some major change was going to happen in my life. Well, there was this church in Jacksonville that was being planted called the Springs Church, and at the time they were looking for a youth pastor, and so they the pastor approached us,
Hmm.
asked us about it, and because of my citizenship, because I was born here, as a kid, I was able to automatically come here. This was an option for me, and just long story short, this was the direction that we felt we were supposed to go in, and we made that choice to jump over here to do it. We never thought we'd be here longer than 5 years,
Okay.
but now we have 3 kids that have been born here. We now find ourselves as the senior pastors of the church at the Springs Church, and feel a very strong commitment to where God has led us on this journey.
That's amazing. I think sometimes we find it difficult to answer that call
Mm-hmm.
because it can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
You had never been to Florida up to that point, if I'm correct.
I had been there once in 2008, I think it was, after I graduated high school. Just went to Universal Studios and
Okay.
came back home again.
So you were a tourist.
I was a tourist.
As a tourist, you came.
Did the tourist stuff.
All right. Have you been back to Universal Studios since then?
Plenty of times.
Plenty of times.
Yeah, I love
Okay.
Universal.
I love it. Okay. I don't necessarily like the crowds and the lines, so
Yeah, you have to get that fast pass.
got to
you
get the
know?
fast pass. That's how you do it. Okay. So you've been the senior pastor of the Springs Church for going on 2 years?
Yeah, going on 2 years.
Going on 2
Yeah.
years. What is the biggest thing that you've learned in the last 2 years about leadership specifically?
The weight of responsibility, that I think that it rises and falls a lot of the time on leadership. And so there is a uniqueness to the fact that whether it's a budget, whether it is a building project, whether it is pastoring people, that there is as a leader, that there's a sense of responsibility that comes upon you. And so having to navigate the emotional, the physical, the spiritual aspects of our life around keeping a healthy balance in order to steward all of those areas is a major component. So learning to navigate the weight of responsibility.
So it is a big responsibility. So we have roughly 1,200 in attendance on a Sunday morning, but you also have a wife, you have 3 children, and you're not Superman.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find that healthy balance? Going back last year, your wife come down with a pretty significant health issue that was concerning. Was concerning not only for you, but for everyone that loves her, and most definitely her. But you didn't miss a beat.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible? Because I've been through some stuff, and I know what it feels like to be concerned. And how did you navigate through that and still manage to lead the church well, lead your staff well, but also be an attentive husband and father?
Well, my wife and my kids is where church begins.
Okay.
And so that's my first responsibility in my life. And so, yeah, Sarah, my wife, we were expecting our 3rd child, Cian. So all my kids have Irish names, Killian, Dervla, and Cian. And Cian was on the way, and my wife, Sarah, started to experience some flashing in her eyes. And so we went to the doctor, we went to see some medical experts, and thankfully they found what it was. There was a small tumor that was growing in the back of her eye. And so we found ourselves in a place where, we were expecting our 3rd child, and now we were kind of looking at a lot of medical examinations. And so we went through a very trying moment. They found that it was a cancerous tumor that was there. And so we had to go back and forth from Atlanta in the middle of a building project, in the middle of the pastoring of the church. And really comes down to the place where faith really kicks in is do we believe what we really believe, that that God is in control and that God is sovereign. And I think that when the rubber hits the road and your faith is really tested, why do we when we are going through college, or why are we, when we're going through school, do we have tests? Because those tests really begin to reveal what's inside in you. And some of those tests that we went through began to reveal that this is not something that we can just strategically, again, get through. This is something that has to be supernatural.
Right.
And that's what God did. His first miracle was to turn water into wine. Irish, I love to quote that one, turning the water into wine. But what it really is turning natural into supernatural.
Right.
And there's moments in our life where I believe you can't just muscle through it. You have to have something more than just the natural, I'm just going to clench my fist and get through it. And so really relying on the Lord, really relying on the community, really relying on the leadership teams that are around us. We're surrounded by great people, and great people who have got great giftings and talents and the ability to steward and lead as well. And so we had to learn what it was to rest. We had to learn what it was to trust. We had to learn to be able to take our hands off and know that God doesn't take his hands off. And we experienced that a lot through that season. So, and thankfully we've been through a lot of that, and we continue to go through some of those procedures, but there was a surgery that took place, and we're seeing all the positive signs that we need to see to be able to continue to move forward in life.
No, that's definitely a testament to leading by example, because while your family was going through this, you couldn't tell. And I think too often we carry the stresses and the burdens and the emotions of things that we're going, we carry them on our sleeves. Like everyone can see them, and that you can only do so far. We in the recovery world, specifically like with alcoholism, we say, white knuckling. This is a person who has stopped doing something and they're just holding on to a sense of peace, but it's not true peace, because at any moment they could let go and go back to where they were. So when you can finally find a place where you can be confident in your faith, and it's, God is in control, God has this, and then you see it with a lot of people in church leadership. It's something happens and that foundation gets knocked out from under them, but you stood firm, and I think the state of the church today is an example of what leading through adversity, looks like. God's church is going to do what God's going to do what he's going to do in his church. But he needs strong men of God to be able to step into that podium and lead well. And I think you've done that.
And I think the two sides of the coin is, you have a trust and a faith that God's got this. But the other side, sometimes as Christians, we can forget that there's a real world that we're living in. There's a real battle that we're facing, that it's to fight the good fight of faith. The kids are still going to get sick. There's mortgages that have to be paid. There is obstacles that life throw at you. And so it's a real fight. There's a real aspect of getting up in the morning and remembering your purpose, remembering your mission in life, and going out and doing it. And, we have seen that over the past 2 or 3 years in our context, in our church, in the organization that I'm pastoring, that even through adversity, even through those seasons of trial, that there can still be flourishing, that there can still be growth, there can still be great things that you are experiencing at the same time as that.
Absolutely. So when we talk about adversity and going through trials and tribulations, I won't say his name, but there was a well-known pastor a few years ago that we're in the pandemic. The apocalypse is here, and we always look at things from our vantage point. We read through the book of Revelations, and we try to take that book and put it into the modern era, and because we can only see what we can see. We take things out of context too often, and the messaging was, we're 4 or 5 years out from the chains being on every door of every church in North America, and we need to plan for that. And I do think there will come a time where persecution that we see in other countries comes here in a greater level. I don't think we're quite there yet, but is that a message as believers, that do we prepare for the day of persecution, or do we do the best that we possibly can to bring glory to God today? Like, is that how we prepare? Like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, what's the process in which we go through to live today without worrying about things that may or may not come?
Well, I always think time is very important. Time is the most important commodity that we have, and we're not promised tomorrow. The Bible says there's an appointed time,
Right.
And so whether that is this kind of apocalyptic kind of, we know that there is a end times that is coming, but in the last 2-3 years, we all know people who have passed on from this life. And so we're not promised tomorrow. So I think taking advantage of every moment that we have, every breath that we have is very special, and it's something that's very important, and we need to take advantage of that. And the forces in this world, I mean, when you just take that season that we've all been so aware of, I mean, from the knowledge of growing up in Ireland, even the different contexts that different people went through during that season, you went through a time where fear like was something that was rampant. Like
Mm,
what's going to happen to me? Is this going to catch me? Is this going to get me? Is this virus going to get me? Is there's a lot of fear around that. And at the same time, then you had a place where offense was all around. Like there was all this tension between this camp and that camp that was taking place. And for us, that's why truth is so important, that we come back and we recognize what truth is. And that's why it's important for me that as a pastor that we are teaching that there is an anchor, there is a foundation, that the winds will come and the waves will come, but there is a foundation that we can build our lives upon, which upholds us and keeps us through all of these different curveballs that life tends to throw at us. Those moments were tough, but even in those moments, there was people who were going through tougher moments. They were
right.
battling personal sicknesses. There was family crises that were taking place, and that was the minor issue that they were dealing with.
Right.
So, we're not. Life is not a bed of roses. There's challenges that we're going to face
Sure.
day to day.
And that's working in ministry for several years myself. That's the one thing that I think I have learned is try to look from a different lens. Because if I look through everything in my lens, and my problems, my concerns, my worries they're mine. They're going to be worse than yours because they're mine. But when you start getting into doing life with people, then you realize that their struggle is the worst thing that they could possibly be going through because it's theirs.
We have about 25 people, I think, on staff that gather in our staff meetings. And one day we kind of stopped our staff meeting and we just went around the room. We took time to pray for everybody, and
Sure.
everybody just shared what was going on personally in their life. And when you begin to hear the struggles that each person is individually going through, you're correct, Will. For that person, that is the worst struggle in the world, and it's
Yeah.
difficult. But that's why the unity is such an important thing. That's why we are, the Bible talks about us that we're living stones, that we are to be neatly fit together, with Jesus being the chief cornerstone. And when we're together in unity, we can bear with one another's burdens. When you're going through a battle, then I want to be there beside you. And I certainly know that when I go through my battles, you're there beside me. So here's the crazy thing about it. What I realize is that although, say, you might be going through a struggle, or maybe something going on in your personal life, there might be something going on home, I think there's a strength within me to be able to come alongside you in that time and uphold you, come alongside you, encourage you, just
Sure.
let you know that I'm there. But at the same time, when I'm going through my personal challenge, you might still have things that's going on in your life, but there's a strength within you to come
Right.
alongside and help. And that's what the unity, within a community that should be there. It doesn't mean there's one person immune or not facing challenges and trials, but there's something within us together that we can help build each other up to get through those moments.
No, absolutely. I think that's the worst thing that we can do is to isolate. And
Absolutely.
and once we get into isolation, it is so difficult to come out of that. And when you look at church leaders, senior pastors specifically, it's, struggles happen, and a lot of times it's because of isolation.
Isolation.
So what are some of the processes in which you go through to make sure that you have accountability, that you have connection? So obviously you're not gonna get up on Sunday morning and throw everything out that you're going through. So what process do you work through to help hold yourself accountable?
Well, I think in leadership structure in general, it's kind of like almost like the triangle effect, that further you go up in the triangle, the more devastating the consequences are for maybe not having those accountabilities
Right.
and not having those structures in place, because I think everybody's susceptible to them. But if you're like lower down on that leadership grid, you may be going through your struggles and battles, like you're in recovery, and people might be going through those moments over and over again. And because of that, there's not always the keys of leadership that's attached because of that.
Right.
But as you go up that, it's very important that you do have those outlets and places, because the consequences to your own personal family, as a church, you just mentioned, like we've about 1,200 people on a Sunday morning that attends the church, that the consequences of that can be devastating. And we've all seen that in leaders, both in the political world, in the church world, in community, that when leaders fail, there's a massive effect on the other side of that. And so for me personally, it's having accountability with people who are further along the journey than I am. Some people, I'm in my mid-30s, so having some people in their 50s and their 60s that have the ability to speak into my life. It's also having some peers and people that are in the same season of life that I'll fellowship, connect with, have open dialogue and conversation with. And here's I think that something that we're struggling with as a society is just healthy correction, healthy conversation, where somebody can speak into my life things that are uncomfortable, and I'm willing to. That's a blessing to have that.
Sure.
And to have that in your life, where somebody will speak hard truths into your life, that you can take that wisdom and walk in it. But what's happening now is there's a desire, because of isolation, to step away, and I don't want to hear those hard truths. I don't want to have that accountability in my life. And none of us have got that strength that we can overcome every single obstacle and challenge. There, we do need that community.
It's to be able to take the wisdom, to be able to take the
Yes.
insight, and not take offense to it.
Not take offense to it.
Because we were a couple of weeks ago, I was teaching on accountability, and was going through the scripture, and one day we will all stand before God and be accountable for our actions. So the thought process behind what I was talking to the group about is, like, we need to create the disciplines to where we are holding ourselves accountable to God today first, because that is the most important relationship in which we had. And I use the example, like, everybody knows me and they know my story, and I cannot go anywhere in Clay County where I do not see someone. If I'm at Walmart or Chick-fil-A, I'm going to bump into somebody that I know. If I go into Duval County, it's about 50% of the time where I bump in. So I have built-in accountability because I've been so vocal about my story, and I've lived here most of my life. Everybody knows me. But I could go over to St. Johns County and not have that same built-in accountability. So if I am not holding fast to what I know to be true and walking in a way that I know I need to walk and holding myself accountable to God, I could go to another county and create all kind of ruckus, and that built-in accountability wasn't there. So it's like, what's a day look like for you? You know, like, how do you, okay, I'm going to wake up on Monday, I'm going to wake up on Tuesday, and I'm going to go through my day without getting so overwhelmed, right? Because, we look at it here, at DeVore Capital. So my CEO, Scott DeVore, I mean, we do lots of different things. We do real estate, we do construction, we do roofing, our tagline is, we got 50 different companies under one roof. But at the heart of everything that we do is we want to see people grow. We want to see people grow in their faith. We want to see people grow in their abilities. But in order to do that, there has to be some accountability. There has to be some processes in place that we expect certain things. So I guess the better question is, what do you expect from yourself?
It's a great question. And just let me introduce that by saying, if you look across the different fields of expertise that we see. If you're a doctor, it takes lifelong learning. One of my best friends is a doctor, and it took him 6 years of college, and then he's constantly going through education and training to better himself in that. When you take like an athlete who's going to the Olympics, it's lifelong repetition of that sport. It's crafting that sport over and over again. If it's a musician, it's hours and hours of practice. You don't just give somebody the keyboard and all of a sudden they're playing Mozart. It takes a long time for them to get to that place where they're there. And I think sometimes in leadership, and this is leadership inside the church and outside the church, because maybe somebody has charisma or has a lot of personality, we tend to hand leadership over. But the leadership has such a detrimental effect. I think it takes lifelong reputation of integrity before we should hand over the keys of leadership that's there. And so in my life, just like a doctor is constantly learning, there's always new viruses that's coming out. There's always new practices coming out. It's lifelong learning. It's
Right.
lifelong development. So I want to be a lifelong learner
Okay.
in what I'm doing. I know I'm going on a tangent here,
No,
but
please.
every season of my life, when I started in youth ministry as in my late teens, early 20s, um, I had to respond differently in those situations. I was, relating to young people a lot more. My language was different in how I communicated. I did a lot of activities, and so my leadership was different in that season and time. But when I became an executive pastor, when I'm overseeing budgets and I'm overseeing staff members, my dress code changed. My how I talked to people changed. In a sense, I had to reinvent myself for that position
Right.
that was there. I had to be aware of my responsibility and my role. And as a senior pastor, now I speak publicly on Sunday mornings, and I don't want just an intellectual word. I want, a word that comes from the Lord. And
Sure.
so it takes time to be in his presence. It takes time to be reading his word. So basically, what you're doing in life, you have to know what are the most important things. You can't do everything. So what
Right.
are the most important things? For me, my wife and my children are at the top of that list. That they are that time spent with them. Rest, I'm having time of rest for me. My physical health is a big one. Having time where I'm active. I've always played sports, so I need that time to be playing sports. So day to day is going back to your question. Like today, this morning, my only time that I have an opportunity to do some of that sports and working out is early in the morning. So
Okay.
the first thing I'm doing in the morning is I'm getting up, I'm having my time with the Lord, and I'm working out, because that's the only quiet time that I'm going to get in the day is early in the morning. So I do that. I prepare my mind for the meetings that I'm about to go into, for the conversations that I'm about to have. And by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I know that my mental and physical energies are going to be waning. So at that point in time, I'm doing less taxing events. I'm answering emails, I'm responding back to messages, I'm wrapping things up, and I'm reprocessing my mind, because I'm going to go home, and the next 3 hours is a key time for me to spend with my family before they go to bed. So to be present, to play the games, to cook, to whatever we're going to do, but to be active and present in that moment in time. So it's prioritizing around what you've been given in your life and what you've been called upon to steward.
And to not compromise that, because
Mm-hmm.
when I came to faith, very immature. While I was a little older, I was immature, and just as a member of the congregation, I think this happens too frequently, and I was guilty of it, putting way more expectation on what your job was supposed to be,
Right.
and thinking that your title is pastor, but I'm expecting you to be Superman.
Right.
And I'm expecting, because again, my struggle is the most important struggle in the world. So when we pick up the phone and we call and we talk, and having that access, and we can't be all things to all people, and you can't, and it's just impossible. So it's imperative that we develop leaders around us
Mm-hmm.
that are truly inspired by God to go out and lead his people. And I like what you said about there are people that, have a good gift of speaking, and they're very, charismatic. And if they walk into a room, everyone flocks to them, but they may not be living a life that is morally upright or walking in a relationship with God that is going to lead people in the right direction. Do we want people to gather around a man, or do we want people to gather around the foot of the cross? And, I think we know the answer to that question, but it's what do you look for in a leader? What do you look for in a young leader?
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to interview someone today, what question would you ask?
I mean, I would start with purpose in life. David was a person of an excellent spirit, or Daniel was, or he was one with an excellent spirit, and that really means an excellent attitude.
Yep.
I think attitude is so important. Again, just going back to, like, one of the things in our society today is the ability to step into a person's life and to serve and to put the needs of others even ahead of your own needs
Right.
at times is something that's very hard to find. But you look at the model of Jesus, he stepped out of eternity, glory, and he took on flesh to come in and serve. He was intentional in the people he chose to spend time with.
Yep.
He spent his time. He did life with them. He sat at the table with them. He corrected them. He knew what it was to be betrayed, and then he empowered. And so when I'm looking at a young leader, there has to be an excellent attitude that this is not just about what I can gain out of this,
Right.
but there's a mission and there's a purpose that's greater than even my own personal gain that I can get out of it.
Right.
Now, I just want to go back to what we were talking about there a moment ago in terms of our own like personal time and what we do, because a thought came to me when for me as a pastor, at the top that we look at is the Apostle Paul. He wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. We look at him and we go, man, he is such a great example. When you read his letters, he is talking about how he wishes or he desires to be with the different churches that he's writing to, but he can't. He can't
Right.
be at all things at once. And so in some ways he's saying my letter is going to have to do.
Right.
That this letter is going to have to do. And sometimes we're trying to do everything, to be everything to everyone, but we can't be. That is an impossibility. And sometimes we got to have the confidence and the ability to say, maybe I can't do everything, but hey, just know that I love you. Know
Right.
that I'm for you. It's my desire to be beside you. It's my desire as a pastor in the church, we've got so many different people with different needs. It's our desire to be alongside every person that's there, but sometimes you can't. But that doesn't change our desires and our love and affection towards them. And so, yeah, I know that's a bit of a tangent. Going back to your question, a young leader, I think the attitude is a massive one for me.
No, that's good. That's actually a really good answer. So that leads to my next question. You can't be all things to all people, and you can't make everybody happy.
You can't.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say at least once or twice a year after you're finished shepherding the congregation on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night, and you've prepared and you've communicated a message that you believe is from God and it's rooted in the truth, and then someone comes with some negativity towards that thought process.
Yes.
I'm probably more of a sinner than you are. We're
that.
going to go with that. I know how my flesh would want to react, like confrontation, right? But we know that's not Christ-like. How do you handle that type of feedback when you're walking and you're calling, you're preparing? This wasn't something that you threw together in 5 minutes. This was a message that was developed through prayer and study and practice, and then you communicate it, and then someone comes and says, could have done better.
I would say vision and timing are so important things. On the timing side of it, we've got to learn our own emotional, physical, spiritual rhythms in our life. Sunday afternoon, I am drained from pouring out.
Sure.
So that is not the time for me to deal with conflict resolution.
Right.
Because my flesh can rise up as easy as anybody else's. So knowing when to handle things and not to handle things are important. Right. People will always say stuff. People will always. I shared a story with our congregation on Sunday morning about we were over at another family's in their church's house for dinner, and they had this amazing southern cooking, and it was an awesome experience. I love the mashed potatoes, and we're sitting around and we're having a great conversation, and we're talking about all the amazing things that we're witnessing and seeing within the life of our church, how their family is blessed, their kids are blessed, all this incredible stuff is happening. And we're just on top of the world. And just before we leave the conversation, the guy the husband of the house, we're having a private conversation just before I leave. And he talks about being in a restaurant where there's 2 ladies on a Sunday morning after church that are having a conversation, and they bring up the name of the Springs Church, the church that I pastor, and talk about how some people that they know have started attending and that they need their heads checked. Now, I'm just after having a meal where we're talking about all the wonderful things that God is doing and how we're on top of the world. But on the drive home that night, all I can think about are these two people that I've never met in my life who, coming through secondhand information, I'm like, what was the thing that like made them say that? I want to go to that restaurant, go back in the cameras, find them and ask them the question, because that's all that I can think about. But that's the flaw within us, is that sometimes we miss the good. We miss what God is doing. We miss all of the blessings that we do have in our life.
Yep.
And we tend to be overly concerned with something that has very little impact on our life. And the second component of that was vision. When I started pastoring the church, you asked me what are some of the main leadership things that I've learned. And I would say the importance of knowing the vision, knowing what we're called to do, knowing what the direction of the church that God is leading us in. Because people will always want to pull it in different directions. You got to have one set of blueprints. You got to have one set of, like, this is where we're going and this is what's going to happen. Because it's going to hurt when people say things. It's going to be hard as leaders when people say, I'm not going to attach to this. I'm going to go to do something else. And there's been those moments along the way. But knowing the direction, being able to make decisions and have the community around you, the leaders, your family around you, that we were walking in this unity in that direction together, helps you navigate some of those comments you're talking about and some of those situations that can be difficult to us.
No, absolutely. There's our personal vision, and then there's the vision of the organization, and they have to align.
They have to.
Because if I'm trying to go left and the organization or the church is trying to go right, then that doesn't work. And as I would consider myself a leader in the church, I would consider myself a leader inside of this organization. But with that being said, I still must submit to your leadership and your vision, just as I have to submit to the leadership of our CEO. Mm-hmm. He has a vision for the company, and I have the opportunity to speak into that.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, Pastor Owen is the senior pastor of the Springs Church. Scott DeVore is the CEO of DeVore Capital. So what he says goes. And I have an opportunity to participate or not. And when you know that you are submitting to the authority of strong men of God, and I can say I have the opportunity to do that in both places, both in work and in the church that my family attends, then it's easy to step into that submission. And, yep, I can follow this vision. Probably isn't the way that I would plan it out on both sides, because I'm typically the smartest guy in the room when I'm the only one in it. And so it's becoming humble enough to allow myself to walk behind and say, okay, this is direction that we're going, and he knows what he's doing. I know that his relationship with the Lord is where it needs to be, so I can confidently walk in that. And, I think in my life, in my experience, it's been one or the other. I've never had an opportunity where they were both in alignment. Mm-hmm. It's, okay, we have this walk that we're trying to do, and then we have the thing that we do to earn money to pay the mortgage and feed the kids. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard to intertwine them. Mm-hmm. And I think when we are people of faith and we are seeking after the heart of the Lord in everything that we're doing, when we can find leadership in the church, when we can find pastors and we have a team of them that are all submitted to the vision and walking humbly in their relationship, it makes it so much easier for us that are kind of outside looking in. We're members of the congregation, we're part of the flock, to say, nope, I can see this level of excellence here. Mm-hmm. I want this level of excellence in the workplace, and I want to be able to bring my faith to work, because I can't leave Jesus at the door. He has to be able to walk in with me. Mm-hmm. And so I want to say thank you for leading well, because it has inspired me to, to be able to do this, to have this conversation. When Scott asked to because he's doing a podcast where, and he says, "Hey, I want you to do one as well." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you want me to talk about?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. You tell me." So I went back and prayed about it and started thinking about it. And I said, "Well, you know what, man? I love what we do. I love the fact that we can build houses and do roofs and sell real estate, and that's amazing. And we do it with a certain level of excellence that is good." I said, "But I do not want to sit in front of a camera and talk about that all day long, because at the end of the day, that shingle's going to turn to dust. The building's going to turn to dust. And what is important is that we are able to get the message of Jesus Christ. We are able to tell people the truth and help them get to eternity. And like, that's the mission and that's the call. And we can blend it, but we got to lead with our faith. And that's kind of what we've set forth to do.
Wonderful.
You know, with this here. And so you're 33? 35. So what would you go back and tell 13-year-old Owen? If you could. You can't, but if you could.
If I could go back and tell 13-year-old Owen, I think I always considered myself a hard worker.
Okay.
I always had, it was something, my parents were hard workers. And so I think that they passed that on, like just working whatever kind of job, whether it's at a convenience store or it's on a farm or, you know, construction, whatever it is, retail, just working hard. And so I feel like that was something that I took with me on the journey. But one thing I don't think I took enough advantage on, that if I could go back and talk to myself, I would say education. I would say spend more time in your education. I don't think I realized the value of that long term and what a big impact that can have on my own personal life. So I would say number one, go back and spend some time on the educational side of it.
Okay.
And the second one that I would say is never give up. Just never give up. Yeah, never give up. I mean, it sounds so cliche, but I think even anybody who's listening into this podcast, you know, that's a message I would give is you are in a fight.
Right.
The Bible doesn't say we're living in a easy life. It's
Right.
not. It's difficult. It's hard. We do face those trials, but don't give up. You know, God is love, and He loves you, and He has got a plan over your life. And you know, when you feel most like throwing in the towel, that is the very moment not to throw in the towel.
Right.
Keep on going. There is light at the end of that tunnel. There is hope. Find yourself around community of people. You know, even at times when you want to isolate yourself, stick within that community and grow together, learn together, develop together, and God is very faithful.
Yeah. No, that speaks to me, because there have been times where I think that it's easier to quit.
It's easier.
But the byproduct of quitting is failure. And then that leads to discouragement and lack of purpose. But the times in my life when I have persevered and it's going to be a struggle, but fought through it and not gave up. The blessing on the other side of that struggle is just been amazing. You know, and being able, going on, 15 years of sobriety. And, as you know, like we lead people down that same journey, but it was hard in the beginning. But there were, strong men of God that were around me, and then that community that knew it was going to be hard. And they told me, this is going to be hard, but it's worth it.
It's worth it.
And that's, kind of become, I understand it's going to be hard, but it's worth it.
Absolutely.
And when you're going through whatever it is that you're going through, nobody ever believes that it's going to be worth it. Like, I know it's hard. You don't have to tell me that, but it's worth it. And when you see men that are walking in their faith and they're leading with excellence, that you have a relationship with, that you can trust, and they tell you it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it, then humble yourself enough to submit to that and continue to walk in it, because you'll be able to get to a place where you have multiple years free of whatever that life controlling issue may have been.
And fight for those relationships.
Yep.
Fight for them. I think that life is hard, at times I heard one person say it like this: if you can count on one hand friends that are true friends, you've had a good life. I'm not talking about surface level, hey, how are you, texting, work colleagues. I'm talking about like you can get real, you can get honest, that they got your back. Fight for those relationships as much as possible. When offense or challenges or difficulties get on the way, they're such a great treasure to have through your life. Even, we've already talked about how I've moved from Ireland to here. Before we moved, we had such a strong friendship network. We were very active in the church there. But when we go back to Ireland on vacation, or we go back there to do maybe a ministry or whatever, those friendships, they never leave. They're a strong, you might not see each other for 2 years, but you get back, they're right there alongside you. And they're there when you pick up the phone, and we're there for them. So fight for those relationships. They're a treasure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I tell people all the time when they look at, because we're in a social media society, right? We're doing this, it's going to end up on social media. So, 900 friends, 1,000 friends, right? It's impossible to really, I got 2,000 followers, but you don't have relationships with all of those people. So I tell folks, look at Jesus. He had 12. You're not Jesus. Take 5, take 6.
Absolutely.
Invest into those relationships just like you, because they are more valuable than anything on Wall Street, anything in the stock market, because you can be poor and have solid friendships and relationships, and you're going to get through it. Mm-hmm. You can lose everything, but if you have no one, you have nothing. Mm-hmm. And you need those relationships. It's absolutely imperative that we have people that we can rely on, and vice versa. The relationships can't be transactional, right? We need people that rely on us, right? Because that's purpose. I have what I would call my personal board of directors. So, and it was, when I first started, I was very immature. And I just, when someone stops consuming alcohol, they have to let the brain rewire, because your maturity level stops at the time you start. So then you have to play catch up. So I had a guy who helped me with my finances. I had a guy that helped me with my relationships. I had a person for every point of my life. And as the journey continued, those men then started to come to me because the relationship was there and they had saw the growth. So it was just when I had that revelation that, I get to sit at the big people table now. Like, Lord had moved in me in a way that I was able to start speaking back. And it was such a blessing, to be able to see. So as we get ready to wrap up, one question: what verse are you hanging on right now?
Oh, Isaiah 48. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of God stands forever.
I love it. That is amazing. Question number 2: obviously the truth and the gospel, but what would you say to someone that says, I don't know if I believe?
What would I say to somebody who says they don't?
I don't know. I've been coming to church for years. I ain't seeing it. I'm not feeling it. I'm not getting the vibe that this thing is working. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that?
I think when you look right back at creation, God looks at everything that he creates and he says, it's good, it's good, it's good. But when he gets to man and to Eve, it says that God said to them. Mm. And I think it's very important to realize that if we are going to believe, it can't be based on other people. It can't be based on just reading it in a book. There has to be something that steps out in faith where you begin to hear for yourself, speak for yourself, to the Lord. He's a God of relationship. He's a God of reconciliation, and He desires to have a relationship with us. So if you just try to figure it all out before you come into a relationship with Him, He's too big for that. You're going to have to come to a place in your life of surrender and beginning to trust that He is who He says He is. And when it comes to belief, there's nothing more important in your life.
Yeah.
There's nothing more important in your life than figuring out that life is a vapor, eternity is eternity. And so that's the number one thing to take as important and put as a focus.
Put it as a focus, yeah. When I've had a couple of young men that have came recently and have asked that question, and that's why I asked. Like, you know, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to seek counsel before we give an answer, and my response was, well, I know why you're here. I said, do me a favor and just keep coming back, keep showing up, and allow what God is going to do to happen, and then you can be a witness to it.
It's not in the heart of God to stay hidden.
Right.
He wants to reveal Himself to.
Yeah.
It's His desire to reveal, and that's my testimony, and that's my experience. That ask and you shall receive.
That's it. I love it. I love it. I was actually just had a thought here a little bit ago, and it's a little off tangent, but God created marriage between one man and one woman. We would agree to that. The statistics, again, show that it used to be one of the primary destroyers of marriage was infidelity. In the world in which we live in today, well, pornography is now surpassing traditional infidelity as one of the leading causes of divorce. And we see it everywhere. And for a young man who is trying to navigate himself through this world and find a wife, how do they combat the temptation? And it's not just because the temptation comes in all shapes and sizes, different forms, but the unity of marriage is so severely under attack. And earlier you said that's what made me start to think about it is, you know, your family comes first. That's your first church, your relationship with your wife, your relationship with your children. And how do we get young men to turn off the devices so they're focusing on things that have meaning and value and that are real and not this addictive, compulsive behavior that is just destroying so many lives?
Well, it is addictive, and it is something that's very damaging at the core. You said, how do we get young men, young women to turn off those devices?
Old men,
yeah, of all ages. I don't know necessarily if there's an answer to the question, how do we get them to turn it off? I think it's more going back to the root of, there's got to be a hate towards it. There's got to be a desire. I mean, when you go into recovery and you deal with those people there has to be a desire there to move away from that.
Right.
And so I believe that for our responsibility, I mean, as a dad, it's teaching it. As a pastor, it's fighting against it. It's putting the truth out there for the conviction, the consciences, to be able to have a standard upon which to make their decision making from. Joseph was one who, in the Bible, was given opportunity. He was put in a position where he could have fallen into immorality, and he ran from that. And it even cost him to run from it.
Right.
But I think that at all costs, you got to run and run for your life.
Amen. Run towards Jesus.
Run towards run to the right place.
Amen. Well, thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you had the opportunity to come today. And I want to thank everyone for stopping by to the Will Podcast, where we talk about wisdom, inspiration, leadership, and legacy. We hope you've been blessed. See you next time.